Tonight, the fallout from the sudden death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. We will talk about the politics of replacing Scalia with Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Judiciary Committee member himself. We'll also take a look at Scalia's enormous legacy. Then the Democratic side of the presidential race is now focusing on race. Hillary Clinton, she met with Al Sharpton today. Then she gave a big speech about racial equality, how that could impact big primaries coming up. Also, as George W. Bush hits the campaign trail for Jeb, Donald Trump slams the former president because 9/11 happened on his watch. Is that fair game or a low blow? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday night. Well, the political battle to replace Justice Scalia, it is heating up. President Obama vows to push on as well as nominate a replacement, but leading Republicans, they're promising the Stonewall. The flags were at half staff outside a snowy and peaceful Supreme Court, but the epic political battle just beginning. The 79-year-old Scalia had been on a weekend quail hunting trip at his ranch in Texas when he was discovered dead in his bed.
He was totally peaceful. He's a man who went to sleep and just didn't wake up.
Before Scalia's family and the court could even announce his death, Senator Ted Cruz fired off this tweet. Justice Scalia was an American hero, Cruz wrote. We owe it to him and the nation for the Senate to ensure that the next president names his replacement, end quote. Within the hour, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell drew the battle lines, declaring this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. Then President Obama weighed in, paying tribute to Scalia, but making it clear he's ready to fight to replace him.
I plan to fulfill my constitutional responsibilities to nominate a successor in due time.
The drama jolted the campaign, the Republican candidates taking the debate stage just minutes after the president spoke.
I do not believe the president should appoint someone.
It's called delay, delay, delay.
Now, Republicans suggest they may not even hold a hearing on President Obama's nominee, no matter who it is. And then Hillary Clinton signaled she's ready to make this a campaign issue.
So I'm hoping that we'll get somebody nominated that everybody will say, hey, the only reason to block this is pure partisanship. And so do your duty.
The list of possible Obama nominees include Merrick Garland, Chief Judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, a moderate who has won praise from Republicans. Circuit Court Judge Jane Kelly, well-liked by fellow Iowan Chuck Grassley, the Republican chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Sri Srinivasan, confirmed by the Senate as Circuit Court Judge 97-0 just 3 years ago. And now let's bring in Democratic Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal. He joins us on the phone. He sits on the Judiciary Committee, was also Attorney General in Connecticut before he took his post at the U.S. Senate. Senator, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Let me read you a couple comments from some of your colleagues in the Senate and get your reaction to it. This from the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He said, the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. And he cites precedent on his side being how close we are to the November election. What's your reaction?
That attitude is an abdication and rejection of our constitutional responsibility in the Senate to advise and consent when the president nominates a Supreme Court justice. And we have that responsibility, whether it is 2 months or 5 months or 11 months, as we are now. In the last year of the presidency, nobody said that the president lacks authority to nominate anybody in his last year, the last quarter of his term. And in fact, Anthony Kennedy in 1988 was nominated by Ronald Reagan 14 months before the end of his term, and he was confirmed in 65 days, I believe, or 85 days. So there's really no precedent for saying that a president is unable or unauthorized to nominate a Supreme Court justice or anybody else, which he has the authority and the obligation to do. It's part of his job, and it's part of our job to advise and consent. And let me just emphasize, any nominee ought to receive exacting and rigorous scrutiny. There should be no rubber stamp. from the Judiciary Committee where I serve or the United States Senate. And I will pledge to ask tough, vigorous questions and impose exacting scrutiny, but there ought to be a hearing and a vote, not just simple sight unseen rejection.
I ask you, Senator, how much this has to do with this particular president, and I do that because Senator Grassley, who's the Judiciary Committee chairman, the committee you sit on, he said the following: this president, speaking of Barack Obama, above all others, has made no bones about his goal to use the courts to circumvent Congress and push through his own agenda. It only makes sense that we defer to the American people who elect a new president to select the next Supreme Court justice. How much do you think Republican opposition, and extends to all the candidates on the trail, and also outright threats from some conservative leaders, is it's because it's Barack Obama, not just a president, not of their party?
I was a Supreme Court law clerk to Justice Harry Blackmun in the 1970s. I was Attorney General of our state and argued 4 cases before the United States Supreme Court. I have immense respect for the court. I had immense respect for Justice Scalia. And the contention, there's no obligation to advise or consent, reject or confirm a Supreme Court nominee, makes absolutely no sense. Whatever anybody thinks about this president, he is the president. He has constitutional obligations in that office, so do we. And I greatly regret dragging the court into the muck of partisan politics. The court should be above it. And I will work to convince my colleagues, whether it's Senator Grassley, whom I regard as a friend, or any of my other Republican colleagues, that we need a bipartisan effort to have a hearing and a vote. And, you know, there's so many issues that are before the court: voting rights, labor rights, reproductive rights, affirmative action, immigration policy, that need answers. Even if you believe the President of the United States is somehow acting unwisely or even unconstitutionally, it's the courts that exist to correct such action. And the Supreme Court can't function properly if it has only 8 members.
Finally, it's a hypothetical, but if Mitt Romney won the presidency a little over 3 years ago, do you think there'd be objection from Republicans with him nominating a Supreme Court justice today?
I hope not. Certainly, I wouldn't object.
Good enough. I appreciate the time on a very busy day. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you again.
Thank you. Take care.
And coming up next, we stay on this subject with a closer look at Justice Scalia's life and legacy. The law professor argued several cases before the High Court.